Lynn Ann.
Good morning.
All right, you're ready to go.
Good morning and welcome. I'm going to introduce our presenter today. Kate Bowen is the Director of Instructional Technology at SUNY New Paltz and the EIT Accessibility Officer for the campus. She, along with her team, support online learning, faculty development of online and hybrid courses, and provide technological support and training for Blackboard and other instructional technology tools. Welcome, Kate. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having us. I'm also here today with my colleague, Rich McElrath, and he is our senior instructional technologist. So in addition to Aaron in the chat, Rich is going to be keeping an eye on that as well. And if he has any quick answers to any of the questions that pop up that are specific to this orientation we're going to be showing, he can just throw those right in the chat. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And today we're going to be talking about our student online learning orientation. So how we're trying to guide students into the remote environment. Creating a student orientation was one of those things that had been on our radar for quite a while, but it was also one of those things that kept somehow just getting on the back burner. So this year, however, it really became something we felt was very critical, especially after seeing the results of a student survey at the end of the spring semester. A lot of those students were stating that they really didn't feel prepared to use the LMS, which on our campus is Blackboard, as well as a lot of concern with feeling like faculty were requiring more work than usual in their seated courses. So I'm getting ahead of myself in terms of the slides. Let me start the actual presentation mode. Okay. So with these basic points in mind, we did have a couple of other goals as well. So when we started working on the project, we had about 5 different objectives that we wanted to meet. We really wanted to create something that was being designed as a lasting resource. We wanted to introduce students to what a model course looks like in terms of quality design and functionality. We wanted to provide background information and supports for online learning. We wanted to define goals and expectations for online or remote learning. And we wanted to provide a way to practice with common LMS tools and functions. So this first one we really felt strongly about was not making this orientation just a contingency tool, but since we were already putting in the time, making it something that would be useful to students on an ongoing basis. So as students go through the orientation, they shouldn't see any language or topics that would tie it to COVID or contingency remote teaching or anything like that, even though this kind of time period was our impetus to really get this going and prepared. So we want it to be a resource that could be used now as many more students were in online courses than ever, but to also be useful into the future to prepare students coming into our programs at any point in time. So there are a few content areas that are more geared specifically to online learning or remote learning or classes with specific online components, such as a hybrid course. But I would say that the majority of the content would be applicable to any course that just had some level of online interactivity. Even a student in a fully seated course that had some content or assignments posted in the LMS could benefit from most of this material. So you can see our welcome announcement from our course. This is a screenshot. So it basically is just welcoming any student who feels that they can make use of this resource. And it's something that we wrote to make it, continuously useful into the future. Our next objective was to use this course as a model to provide students with a reference of what a well-designed course looks like. We knew from survey feedback that we received in the spring, as well as some other data that we had prior to COVID, that many of our students had little or no experience with online learning. So this posed a challenge. If you don't know what a good course looks like, if you don't have a mental model for that, it's sometimes difficult to articulate what's missing from the course. So for students in the spring, we found that they could recognize when a course hadn't transitioned successfully, but they really didn't know how to articulate that or explain that when they were trying to make their concerns known to their advisors or to the administration. So if a student goes through this orientation course, then they can see what a model course looks like. We tried very hard to be really consistent in terms of having a clear format, using our default left-hand menu, module structure, very consistent throughout. I should also point out that this orientation dovetails with a faculty training course that we developed in the late spring to help guide faculty in making their own online or remote courses. So if faculty followed that guidance in that training course to build their courses, then their developed course should look a lot like this orientation. Additionally, prior to COVID, it was our campus policy that faculty had to go through a development process to create their first online or hybrid course. And the courses of faculty who have gone through that training as well should also look very similar to the design of our orientation. So if you take a look at the screen, we have the file structure from our student orientation on the left and our faculty training on the right. And while it's not an exact one-to-one trade-off, you can see that we spend a lot of time in both courses at the outset in Module 1 talking about time management and planning. From the student side, it's explaining time on task and how it's figured out. For faculty, we go through that as well, and then how to apply that to their content. Then we get into navigating the course, for students, what a good navigation looks like, for faculty, how to design that good navigation, and then finally using the course tools on both sides. So these two courses were really designed to fit into each other. So if faculty are planning those well-designed courses, then students can use the orientation to really get a good sense of how to navigate them. So overall, our hope was that between our traditional development process and the new self-paced training courses we released, that students would be seeing this overall format and course design in many of their actual courses. And this would mean they would need to spend less time getting acclimated to the online environment of their courses, and instead would be able to focus on the material right away. All of this also factors into the idea of platform fatigue that I think most of us have been hearing a lot lately. If you haven't heard this term, it essentially refers to frustration that students feel over having to learn many different tools, different course models, and different course designs because there isn't a sole template or a set of tools that a school prescribes and faculty have to follow. And this is not to say that faculty can't also feel this platform fatigue. I think a lot of us switching from meetings to teaching and going onto different platforms feel this. So, trying to minimize that feeling for students was something that we felt very strongly about. So again, for us at New Paltz, our model course includes our default left-hand menu, which has 3 parts. So we have course communication, course content, and support. And then within these sections, we have the course orientation area and the content area, which are the primary locations for course materials. And in these sections, we demonstrate the same folder structure that we would recommend to our instructors when they are building their courses. And part of the orientation is really to encourage students to open and use all of these folders to make sure they're getting all the necessary content. So taking a look at our content area here, you can see that we've broken down the bigger topics into modules, and within that we have our lessons, which are all contained in a different folder, and everything in that lesson folder is specific to that sort of subcategory. So we have a very strict sort of hierarchy of delivering content, and that's something that we're hoping our faculty will follow as well. Okay, so hopefully you now have some context of where we're coming from in our design and what we wanted to convey to students with this design. So I'll transition now into more of the actual content of the orientation. First off, I want to talk a little bit about the course orientation section. And this is an area that we recommend for all courses, and it provides an overview for how the course will function and any general background information. Since this is an orientation for an orientation, it does sound a little bit funny, but the space did work really well for our purposes, just as it does for most of our typical courses. First up, we have a section on technology requirements for Blackboard. And you'll notice that we use the word preferred here so that students know that they do have options in some of these cases, but we do clearly state when something won't work optimally for them. For example, Safari and Blackboard don't play nice together, so we make sure to emphasize those types of points. We discuss things like preferred browsers, operating systems, and types of audio-video peripherals that might be helpful. These types of audio-video peripherals might be more necessary right now when so many classes are making use of synchronous online environments. We never really saw a lot of the use of web conferencing in the past, but that might be something that shifts in a post-COVID world now that faculty do have some success using these technologies. So we think this section will continue to be useful to at least some students into the future. We also have some guidance on the mobile app because we have learned that a larger than expected number of students are taking courses using a mobile device as their primary means of accessing their courses. Again, this is not something we would have really focused on in a pre-COVID, but if we had, if we had built the course at that time, but it is a topic that seems to be trending towards greater usage, so we really wanted to make sure that we had that covered. Going forward, we also provided a section on support networks across campus in 3 different categories: health and wellness, academics, and technology. If we drill down into any of these areas, and I'll drill down a little bit, you'll see that it's a collection of links. We have 2 links here, but there are more. We have the Psychology Counseling Center and the Health Center. The reason behind using links out to these other support networks is that we wanted to raise awareness of these supports, but since we're not the owners of this content or these support centers, we didn't want to include information in this particular orientation that could later become dated or that we would inadvertently misrepresent in some way. So by linking out to the main pages for these groups, we point students to the source of this information and hopefully to that group's most up-to-date information. The final section of the course orientation is the optional technology training guide. Again, survey data told us that there was a good percentage of students out there who just did not feel literate or comfortable with even the fundamentals of computers or technology. So we included this section to give students who felt this way a place to go to catch up. For the content in this section, most of it is pulled from our LinkedIn Learning account. If you're not familiar with LinkedIn Learning, it was formerly known as lynda.com. And basically, it's a set of really great, easy to follow, but very thorough video tutorials. So instead of writing all this information ourselves, my colleague Rich spent a great deal of time curating all of these videos and selecting the ones that seemed most useful to students engaging in remote learning. Though realistically, these skills are basic life skills that most people should have. So if this orientation is the impetus just to learn these skills, then we would consider that a win. So transitioning now to the content area of the course, I want to take a look at the first 2 modules on their own. These modules are more about the mindset of taking any sort of online or remote learning, or even just more broadly, just engaging in any course with online or remote activities. So going back, if this was a student in a face-to-face course, but it did have some online activities, then these types of things would be useful for them to know. The first module really spends a lot of time on explaining how instructors plan online or remote learning, explaining how these courses often involve more active learning, and then setting expectations for how much work and the types of work to expect in these classes. Given how much we were hearing from students that online classes were more work, we really wanted to help contextualize. So for students who felt like they were doing more, was that because the faculty member was preparing too much work, or was it because they were used to sitting in a lecture and not having to interact, and now they were having to do more active learning? On the other hand, this can go both ways. So it might help some students to recognize that they're getting an appropriate amount of work, but it would also help them to realize if they're getting far too much or too little. And this goes back to the idea that students who are unexperienced with these types of courses don't have a good basis for comparison. So hopefully going through these modules help to place things in context, and students could either come to terms with the workload or maybe come to the realization that they were carrying too many credits, or be able to articulate to advisors or administration that the workload was not meeting expectations in some way. In the second module, we talk a lot about embracing ownership or responsibility in online or remote learning. Again, for students who are new to online or remote, it may feel more isolated at first, and you may not have all the verbal supports that you're used to having in an in-person class. So even if the instructor is doing a really great job, they're posting reminders, answering emails, grading in a timely manner, it's still up to the student to read those reminders, check their grades, manage their calendar, etc. So we remind students up front in the orientation that part of the deal is that they do have to step up. Maybe it's doing more than they're used to, or maybe it's just a different way of approaching the course than in a seated course, but they really do need to take charge of these elements. And you can see in Module 2 that we cover things like, appropriately managing your campus account, monitoring your email, using the calendar. We have a couple of different calendar options we tell them about, being aware of important policies, accessing your grades in the My Grades area. So those are all things that they need to be taking charge of in their online or remote course. And then finally, the remaining content modules of the orientation provide everything a student needs to get familiar with interacting in the online environment and successfully using all the tools through practice. So beginning in Module 3 here, we talk about how to get started in a course. We point out the areas that they're likely to see. Again, we're assuming that their instructor is following our guidance for course design, and how they should then approach the course. We then move into different ways that they can create content, both in our LMS and using other instructional technology tools licensed by the campus. For example, this semester, we purchased a license for a tool called Nomia, which is a multimedia content creation and storage platform. So we spent a lot of time on that because we expected a heavy adoption right away. So, that kind of focuses them on ways that they can create content that they can then put into Blackboard. Modules 5 and 6 are much more how-to, and they explain how to use all the primary learning tools in the LMS, as well as how to complete tests and assignments. While those are more technical how-to, we definitely do talk about best practices throughout those areas and discuss when and why some of these tools might be used for different types of assignments. Again, just trying to provide context and some rationale for why faculty might have adopted these tools. So that covers how we carried out our primary objectives, but before I close, I do want to discuss how we hope this course can be used in the future, as well as a few lessons learned from our first rollout this past fall. As I showed the modules in the content section, you may have noticed that every module has a self-assessment quiz, and if you didn't notice that as I went through, that is actually the case. These quizzes in each module were all 10 questions in length, and they were self-grading type questions. So multiple choice, multiple answer, drop-down multiple choice. If you're familiar with Blackboard, this is called a jumbled question, sort of like question 4 here, or true false. So these were things that the students could take on their own. They could take them as many times as desired, and when they went back, if they chose to review the test, they would get extensive feedback on right or wrong answers. So the goal here was to use the self-assessments as learning tools in and of themselves as students went through the orientation. They also served a secondary purpose in forming the basis of an optional final assessment. So this was in place so that students could either take the assessment for their own purposes to make sure that they understood the content of the course overall, or it could be assigned by a faculty person and the student would have to take the assessment and pass it with a score of 85% or better in order to earn a certificate. So we We really wanted to have that in place because some faculty were saying, how do I know that my students are prepared? And we saw that final assessment as a way of sort of the student providing proof that they had gone through the course and understood it to a certain level. So even though the student could go through all the self-assessments ahead of time, again, because we saw them as a learning tool, you know, and they were then pulled for the final assessment, you know, the questions and answers are there, but they have to do the work of going through those and understanding them. We did a lot with the assessments in terms of switching the question order and the answer orders for most of the questions. So students would have to look at all the self-assessments carefully in order to then apply those to the final assessment. So if they've gone through that work, then they've probably accidentally learned at the same time anyway. So we felt that that was still a valid final assessment. In terms of some lessons learned, we learned this semester that we did want to make it easier for students to find and use this orientation, and also for faculty to, oops, I might have gone back too far. Oh, I'm out of order, sorry about that. In terms of lessons learned, we did want to make it easier for the students to find this and for faculty to assign it if they wanted to, especially if they wanted the students to earn that certificate. So starting in the spring 2021 semester, every course will have a link to the orientation right in the Blackboard shell. So you can see here, this is just a random spring 21 course in anthropology. And you can see down in the support area, the first link is the online learning orientation. So faculty can either require students go through the orientation in full just by clicking on this link, or just have an easy way to direct students to it as a reference guide or on an as-needed basis if a student is struggling. So if they're saying, you know, I'm really not sure how to post in the discussion area, the faculty members can say, click on this, the online learning orientation, go to the discussion section, and there's some content that you can use to get started. So our final lesson learned, our rollout in the fall was a little bit more rocky than we were hoping for, though I believe we have thought it out a little bit better for the spring. Basically what happened was when the timing of when the course was completed was after students had already been enrolled into the course site. So when I copied the course into the course site, it seems to have triggered notifications of new content for every single piece of content in the course. So effectively, I overwhelmed the student notifications during their first week of the semester, which was absolutely the last thing I wanted to do. So I then had to follow up with an announcement showing them how to turn off notifications in a course, which, you know, felt very counterproductive, but it was necessary given the level of notifications they were getting. So for the spring, we've planned ahead. We already have the materials ready to go in the course site, and students are going to be added afterwards. So I still have the guidance about turning off notifications in the welcome announcement, just in case that still becomes necessary once we add the students, but hopefully we'll avoid any real problems with that this time around. So I appreciate your time listening to this now, and I'm happy to turn it over to you. What questions can I answer for you, or what more can I show you about the orientation? I do have the live course up, as well as our faculty development course, if anyone had any interest in seeing that. So I'm really happy to go deeper into any area or show you anything else about these trainings that you would like to see.
Thank you, Kate. That might actually be great, given that we have some time left too. I'm going to go through a couple things in the chat just so it's captured in the recording as well. Okay. And Rich has been answering some of this too. So John had asked how many students go through the Blackboard tutorials, and Rich mentioned that you do use tracking metrics to track all the users and their time on task. Just wondering if you knew maybe a percentage of students who are using this.
I don't off the top of my head. I haven't looked in a while. We did get a lot of, so this was one of those, any publicity is good publicity. So we did get a ton of early hits just because students were checking out the course to see what was producing all those notifications. So we do have a good percentage of students actually clicking into the course, but I would have to look and see what the average amount of time spent in the course was. We also enrolled all of our current students as well as all of our current faculty and staff, thinking that they might want to go through it as well to see what was in there before they, recommended it or prescribed it to students. So some percentage of the enrollees in the course are faculty and staff who wouldn't necessarily be going through everything. So that would impact our metrics a little bit.
Sure, thanks. Rich, did you have something to add? I forgot to do the mute, but you should be good now if you want to jump in.
Oh, no problem. I thought we also had metrics on the faculty orientation. Kate, do you have a percentage of the faculty visiting the faculty orientation?
I was looking more for the faculty orientation, about more than an hour spent. So out of, I think, 800 faculty or 700 faculty, we had about 70 faculty who spent an hour or more, with the most amount of time spent, I think, was 10 hours. So we were looking more at that.
Thank you. So Camille, they are looking at redoing their orientation, and she was asking how long it takes to build the orientation, who was involved, and how do students find their way, which you did show us about adding that link to the navigation. And Rich mentioned almost full-time, 2 weeks from planning to start, and considering things in modular, so they knew, where to have the discussion posts, outlines, all the content, and so forth. So I'm wondering, can you have anything to add about who was involved in creating the orientation?
Yeah, this was a collaboration just between me and Rich. So between the two of us, we put all of this together, and we were trying to move very quickly on it. Most of the spring and summer was just trying to keep afloat with everything that was happening. But we did want to have this prepared before the start of the fall semester. So we really pushed through this. As I mentioned, Rich did a lot of work in the orientation section. Some of that had been somewhat borrowed from the work he had done in our faculty development training. So putting together all those resources about technology skills, using your computer, some of the security and privacy issues. So he spent a great deal of time in that. And then some of our resources we're able to link, since we're technically part of IT, the way our campus structure works. We do have a lot of knowledge-based articles that we had created around some of these other tools and functions in Blackboard. So some of it was just coming up with like a blurb to explain about the tool and then linking out to some of our already existing documentation. So it was good that we already had so much of that pre-prepared.
If I could offer advice, is to think long-term structure. That was really the best. I think early on, when we started developing resources for COVID, that we did mention things like COVID and contingency, and through time we stopped mentioning those things to try to make a resource that stood the test of time. So once we figured that out, we realized also not to date ourselves and mention particular software or things like that if it was going to be dated. So we were very careful in labeling and terminology and how we put things together previously too. And in this case, we were more mindful in putting it all together. And for future, very careful using consistent labeling to try to align with everything that our administration was saying as far as labeling our delivery modalities and things like that, to make sure that everything agreed with each other.
Yeah, that's certainly good advice so that it doesn't outdate itself, right? So let's see, some other questions. Is the orientation only available to students after the first class? I think Rich answered that it is available to students as soon as they are students taking courses and it doesn't expire. Are the courses open source or shareable for customization?
So it was built in Blackboard Learn. So if you do use that as your platform as well, we'd be happy to share the course cartridge with you. Or that's not the right word, an export of the course for you. If that way you could explore it thoroughly, see if there was stuff that you could make use of. If you do not have Blackboard, we'd be happy to maybe add you as a guest into our course just so you could take a look around and get a sense of what everything was. But we wouldn't have a way to directly share it out to you.
Sure, and we can have your contact information in the chat for folks at the end as well. It looks like you're showing your course to us, and I know Debbie mentioned an interest in seeing what it looks like in a course. They have had issues at NASA linking a course within a course, so I'll let
Yeah.
you get to this.
So this is the orientation itself. This is our version for spring 2021 that we have ready in advance. So it doesn't have students in it at this point in time. So as I mentioned, it does use our default left-hand menu, and we have our course orientation. So parts that I didn't show in the screenshots just to fit everything on the screen. You know, we do have a welcome section just saying how to use the orientation itself, just so students know how to go through the orientation. And we talk about different departments that support online learning on our campus. And then we do get into those different sections in the orientation. So again, you know, just drilling down into it, we do use folders a lot because that's our recommendation to faculty. We just find that they're very easy to swap in and out of areas. So if you decide to redesign a little bit, a lot of times instead of just moving individual pieces of content, it's easy to just swap a folder into a different section. And it makes it very easy to redesign your course. So when you go into any of the sections, we just tried to keep our language very simple. We didn't want to use a lot of technical jargon. We really wanted it to be accessible to everybody in terms of being easy to use and understand. And we do link out to different places, especially if it's something that's likely to change frequently. As I mentioned with some of our support sections, the different departments that we talked about. Same thing in the content section. As you go into any of the modules, you'll see additional folders. And again, we tried to say what was in the folder just to make it really simple to go through and get at what you need. So any of these sections you can click in, and they're broken into very quick and digestible chunks. And we just try to keep it as friendly and as approachable as possible.
And Kate, is this all really self-paced, self-directed, or is there any interaction built in with an instructor or other learners, maybe in a discussion forum, etc.?
So we do have learning tools built in. So in the later modules, when you get to using some of the tools, so module 2. So technically they could interact with other students, but we didn't find that that happened very frequently in the fall. So when you get to the sections about using discussion boards, blogs, journals, wikis, even groups, there are ways to practice with that. So for example, when you're in the groups lesson, you can actually try joining a sample group just so that you could see that group pop up on the left-hand side, because we talk about where to find your groups. So you can, you know, enroll yourself into a group. When you go into the discussion board section, you can actually try a discussion board, same thing with the blogs, wikis, and journals. And then also when you get into the assignments and tests area, same thing, you can submit an assignment. And as I mentioned, throughout the entire course, there are self-assessment modules in each section. So you're really actually practicing with tests throughout the entire course.
Do you have a sense of about how much time it takes a student to go through everything?
Rich, would you say we were shooting for like 2-3 hours tops?
I know the faculty one, I think we said, what, 8 hours?
Yeah, but we
Right.
tried to keep this a little.
So, yeah, I can't remember when Troy and I did a test run, we did it, and we documented how long it took us per thing. So I think we did it under 2 to 3 hours.
Yeah, I don't think it should take too much longer than that.
We kind of did some of this stuff cold, like we didn't read anything and went through it cold, and then we went back and read stuff and then went through it, and we tried to give Kate feedback. We kind of did the core stuff and Kate did the fine stuff, how it all worked out. So,
Yeah, so
I think 2 to 3 hours, and Troy did help us. We have a full-time support person who went through and we gave feedback on some of the language and stuff like that. So I think 2-3 hours.
Yeah. And then as Rich mentioned, Rich and Troy, since I prepared all the quizzes, they went through and they took those quizzes cold just to make sure that I wasn't, giving anything that was too hard or too tricky. The goal was not to try to trick them. It was to have them learn about these different areas. So I didn't want to put in anything that, was tripping them up, because as our campus IT experts, if they were getting tripped up, then it was probably too tricky of a question. So we did go back and refine some of the self-assessment questions, just to make sure that we were teaching and not tricking. So that was important to us as well.
Hey, can you share one of the early planning outlines? Is that possible?
I don't think I have one.
It was in Google.
Easy.
It was in OneDrive.
If you want to see if you can pull that up.
Yeah, I'm looking now. So somebody asked if we could share preliminary outline or things of that, and that's how we worked. We actually started in OneDrive, and we did this course bullet list, and then we just kind of kept backfilling in things that we thought that we would need to put in there.
While you're looking for that, I think in my slideshow I ended up skipping over the section on the final assessment, so I just want to jump back to that real quick. So if students are either required or they want to take the final assessment, they would come into this section. And when they first clicked into it, they would only see this top section and this first badge, which talks about the criteria for earning the course completion certificate. So once they've actually taken the test, then this final box would show, and that's where they can claim their certificate. I don't know if it'll show me it. It's a very simple certificate, just basically a text document, but they can either print that. Let me see, have a student view up as well, so let me just double check. Okay. Yeah, so the student would get this badge showing right in Blackboard, and then they would have the option to print it. It is very, very basic, but we assumed that, they wouldn't try to Photoshop it. It would take them more time to try to figure that out than to actually work in the orientation. And faculty could always check in with us to make sure that they actually earned it, if there was any questions about whether that was legitimate or not.
I think that we've addressed most of the questions in the chat. I just want folks to know that you can click on your microphone icon to unmute if you have something to ask. And please also let us know if we missed anything that you may have typed in there.
I have a quick question about your badge. Is
Sure.
that visible anywhere except within this program?
No, so that's just within Blackboard at this point in time. We are in the early stages of getting involved with Credly, so I didn't know in the future if that was something that we would be able to work into that, but again, that's still in the early stages, so this is just within the Blackboard course.
Just within this Blackboard course. So it isn't a badge that could be added to their profile pic or anything within Blackboard?
I don't believe so. So this is my first time working with the achievements tool in Blackboard. So I didn't see a way for it to show elsewhere, but if anyone else on the call knows better, please let me know, since I am still learning this tool.
Well, far more than many of us, specifically myself, but this is very exciting. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Hi, this is Deborah Spiro. I'm not sure you covered it, but, well, two things. One, just to let you know, and if you need any support with this, we use digital badging, and we've implemented it with various student workshops that we run. We have not we're working on redoing our student orientation, so we would include digital badging, and that would then carry with them with on a portfolio or any place that they want. So it's easy to work through. That being said, my question with an orientation that we currently have that's outdated, I asked this in the chat. We tried to link to it when we wanted to use it, but in any case, we found that students were getting lost going from their Blackboard course to the student orientation, and they weren't finding their way back. Did you have a magical solution for that, if that makes sense?
So when we added, so this is actually, let me open a different version. We'll just go to any of our spring courses.
Open the orientation in a new tab so it doesn't take over the frame set of the current course.
Right. And we tried that, and we tried the frame within the frame, but in the new tab, then they see the menu and they're in the new course. You found that worked, that was okay. They were able to understand to go back to the original tab to find their way?
I mean, we still haven't rolled it out with that format, but as Rich mentioned, when they click on the online orientation, it does open another tab. So hopefully they would understand that they can click back to their original course. So we'll have to see if there's any confusion around that once we actually have students in the site.
Okay.
To us,
great.
it's intuitive, but you never know how it's going to be on the end user side.
Thank you very much. This is excellent.
Great, thank you.
You know, the other great thing too is even if, you know, students maybe go through this quickly, it's always a resource that they can come back to. So for example, if they're in a course that is using group work and their previous course was not, they can come back here and read that module about group work and how to participate and, you know, how to do the technical sort of things that are in here. So that's a nice, you know, option as well, that this is a living resource that exists for the students throughout their duration.
Right, and that actually brings up a great point about one of our design considerations. Originally, I was thinking of having each self-assessment have to be passed with a certain score in order to get the final certificate. But when you do that sort of, you know, adaptive release where you have to pass one quiz to get to the next module, we realized that they wouldn't be able to jump ahead. They wouldn't be able to find something that was very specific to what they needed unless they went through everything, and that might deter them from going through anything. So that was definitely one of our design considerations, and that's why we opted for the optional big assessment at the end of the course instead of doing that adaptive release where they have to go through each module one by one. Great.
Well, if you could stop sharing for me, Kate, I'm going to turn this back over to Lynn, who is going to wrap us up. And while she does that, I'm going to go ahead and post some links for everyone in the chat so that you can get the recording and so forth.
Thanks, Erin. First off, before everyone scatters to other important things, thanks so much for joining us today. And thank you, Kate and Rich, for your participation in today's webinar. Specifically, and for sharing your expertise. As you know, the session recording and the slides will be uploaded to the bit.ly link that you can see on your screen. There is also a survey. We encourage you to please contribute to that survey for other great ideas. And don't forget that additional sessions are happening all throughout the week, including tomorrow. So we hope that you join us again and we see you there. Thanks so much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. I just added my email to the chat. So if anyone is interested in following up, or if you would like a copy if you're a Blackboard school, please do feel free to reach out.